In the Thai forest of Ivory Coast, a group of chimpanzees has been watching a red colobus monkey move through the canopy for 20 minutes. They have not made a sound. They are not foraging. They are spread across the forest floor and the lower branches in a pattern that a human observer, watching from a distance, would eventually recognize as deliberate. One chimpanzee is moving ahead of the monkey's direction of travel. Another is climbing to block the route behind it. Two more are positioned on the flanks, low in the trees, still and silent, and the alpha male is waiting below the monkey's current position, watching it with the focused attention of an animal that has done this many times before. The hunt has already begun. The monkey does not know it yet. Subscribe right now and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that button now before this video goes any further. It costs you nothing and it keeps this channel going. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from and what time it is. We read every single one. The cooperative hunting behavior of chimpanzees was first described in systematic detail by Christoph Boesch and Hedwig Boesch-Ackermann, who began studying the Thai forest chimpanzees in 1979 and spent years documenting what was at the time one of the most surprising behavioral findings in the history of primatology. Before the Thai research, the assumption was that chimpanzee hunting, which had been observed at Gombe and other sites, was essentially opportunistic. A chimpanzee would seize a small animal when the opportunity presented itself, and the coordination between individuals was limited to the simultaneous presence of multiple chimpanzees near the same prey, rather than true cooperative behavior with divided roles. What the Thai forest data showed was something fundamentally different. The Thai forest chimpanzees hunted with a division of labor that the Boesch documented and categorized into 4 roles. The driver pushed the prey through the canopy in a direction chosen by the group. The blocker positioned itself ahead of the prey to cut off escape routes. The chaser pursued the prey directly when it fled, and the ambusher waited at the predicted point of the prey's escape to make the capture. Not every hunt involved all 4 roles, and individual chimpanzees did not always occupy the same role across different hunts. But the coordination between individuals was structured enough that the Boeschs could predict which individual would take which role based on the configuration of the chimpanzees relative to the prey at the start of the hunt, and the behavior of the hunting individuals was responsive to the behavior of their partners in ways that required each individual to monitor and respond to the actions of the others. The prey of choice for the Thai forest chimpanzees was the red colobus monkey, a medium-sized arboreal primate whose defensive behavior, which involves fleeing through the canopy while staying in close groups that can mob a single predator, is less effective against the coordinated approach of multiple chimpanzees attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. A lone chimpanzee pursuing a red colobus group in the canopy would typically fail. The colobus can outmaneuver a single pursuer in the canopy environment, and the mobbing behavior of the group can drive a lone attacker away. A coordinated group of chimpanzees that has blocked the escape routes and positioned individuals at multiple points in the canopy simultaneously can trap a subset of the colobus group in an area where the options for escape have been closed off. And the individual colobus that finds itself isolated from its group in this situation is a colobus that can be caught. The success rate of Thai forest chimpanzee hunts documented by the Boeschs was substantially higher for coordinated hunts involving multiple roles than for hunts involving only 1 or 2 individuals without the division of labor. The data showed that hunts with 4 or more participants in clearly differentiated roles succeeded at a rate of approximately 70%, compared to a much lower success rate for single individual hunts and uncoordinated group hunts. The hunting partnership produced a synergistic outcome. The combined behavioral input of the coordinated group produced a success rate that was higher than what the individual contributions would have predicted if combined without the coordination. This is the defining feature of genuine cooperation in the behavioral ecology sense, and it is what distinguishes the Thai forest hunting from the opportunistic group predation that had been observed at other sites. The question of whether the Thai forest chimpanzees were genuinely cooperating in the cognitively rich sense, whether they had a shared representation of the goal of the hunt and of each individual's role in achieving it, or whether the appearance of coordination was an emergent property of individual behavioral rules, that happen to produce a coordinated outcome without requiring genuine shared intentionality, became one of the central debates in cognitive science and behavioral ecology after the Bosch data was published. Michael Tomasello and his colleagues at the Max Planck Institute argued that the Thai forest cooperation lacked the shared intentionality that characterizes human cooperation, pointing to the absence of explicit communication about role allocation and the failure of chimpanzees in laboratory settings to spontaneously coordinate on cooperative tasks in ways that would demonstrate genuine joint intentionality. Bosch argued that the field data from Thai showed clear evidence of role-taking and response to partner behavior that the laboratory settings failed to elicit because they lacked the ecological validity and the social context of the natural hunting situation. The debate about shared intentionality in chimpanzee cooperation reflects a broader debate in cognitive science about the relationship between behavioral evidence and the cognitive processes that the behavior reflects. And it is a debate that the behavioral evidence from the field and the experimental evidence from the laboratory have not yet resolved to the satisfaction of both sides. What the Thai forest data established is that chimpanzees in the wild produce coordinated hunting behavior with a division of labor, response to partner behavior, and success rates that exceed what individual hunting would produce. Whether the cognitive architecture underlying this behavior includes the shared intentionality that human cooperation involves is a question that the field continues to address. The social consequences of a successful hunt are one of the most behaviorally rich and most intensively studied aspects of the chimpanzee hunting phenomenon because the distribution of the meat from a successful hunt reveals the social dynamics of the hunting group in ways that the hunting behavior itself does not fully expose. At Thai Forest, the meat from a successful hunt was distributed to the individuals who had participated in the hunt, with the individual who made the capture having priority access to the carcass and distributing portions to the others. The pattern of distribution was not random and not simply based on dominance. The individuals who had contributed most actively to the hunt, particularly those who had occupied the most demanding roles of driver and blocker, received larger portions than individuals who had contributed less. The meat distribution at Thai therefore reflected the contribution of each individual to the cooperative effort, a pattern that the behavioral ecologists studying the data interpreted as a form of reciprocal exchange that rewarded cooperation and incentivized participation in future hunts. The contrast between the Thai forest meat distribution pattern and the meat distribution pattern at Gombe, where the alpha male's dominance over the carcass was more pronounced and the connection between hunting contribution and meat access was less clear, illuminated the degree to which the social dynamics of the group shape the behavioral outcomes of cooperative hunting. At Gombe, where the hunting was less coordinated and the dominance hierarchy more directly controlling of meat access, the incentive structure for cooperative hunting was different from Thai, and the hunting behavior at the two sites reflected this difference. The Thai forest hunts were more coordinated and more successful than the Gombe hunts, and the meat distribution at Thai more directly rewarded the hunting contribution than the meat distribution at Gombe. The role of meat in the social life of chimpanzee communities extends beyond the immediate context of the hunt and the post-hunt distribution. Meat is a high-value food resource in the chimpanzee diet, one that provides concentrated protein and fat in a diet that is otherwise primarily composed of fruit and other plant material. The possession of meat confers social leverage on the possessor, who can use the distribution of meat as a social currency to build and maintain alliances, to attract and retain mating partners, and to manage the social relationships of the community in ways that the possession of fruit does not allow. The political dimension of meat distribution, which Frans de Waal documented in the Arnhem chimpanzee colony, and which the field data from Thai and Gombe corroborates in the wild population context, connects the hunting behavior to the broader social dynamics of the community in ways that make the hunt more than simply a feeding strategy. The relationship between hunting and reproductive success in male chimpanzees, which has been studied through the analysis of the correlation between individual hunting frequency and paternity in the communities where both behavioral and genetic data are available. has produced findings that support the hypothesis that hunting is a competitive strategy as well as a foraging strategy. Males who hunt more frequently have been found in some studies to sire more offspring than males who hunt less frequently after controlling for the confounding effects of dominance rank and other variables that predict reproductive success. The mechanism by which hunting frequency translates into reproductive success is proposed to be the meat for sex exchange. Females who receive meat from a male are more likely to mate with that male, and males who hunt more frequently have more meat to distribute and therefore more mating opportunities. The evidence for this mechanism is not conclusive, but it is consistent enough across multiple studies to be taken seriously as part of the explanation for why male chimpanzees hunt at all, given the costs and risks that hunting involves. The costs and risks of hunting for the individual chimpanzee are not negligible. Pursuing a prey animal through the canopy, jumping between branches and navigating the three-dimensional complexity of the forest at high speed produces injuries that the veterinary records of the long-term research programs document with some regularity. Falls from height, bites from prey animals, and the physical demands of the pursuit itself are all sources of injury risk that the hunting behavior imposes. The decision to hunt and the intensity of the individual's participation in a hunt therefore reflects a cost-benefit calculation that weighs the probability of obtaining meat and the social benefits of meat possession against the probability of injury and the energy cost of the hunt. The experienced hunters in a community who have accumulated the skill to navigate the pursuit efficiently and to occupy the optimal role for their physical capabilities bear a different risk profile from the less experienced hunters who are still developing their hunting skills. The development of hunting skill in young male chimpanzees has been studied through the longitudinal tracking of individual hunting behavior from adolescence through adulthood in the long-term research populations. Young males begin participating in hunts as observers and peripheral participants before taking on active roles, and the progression through the roles from less demanding to more demanding reflects the accumulation of skill and the social integration into the hunting group that comes with experience. The most demanding role, the ambusher who must predict the prey's escape route and position himself at the right location before the prey reaches him, is a role that the most experienced and most skilled hunters disproportionately occupy, because it requires the most sophisticated behavioral prediction and the best knowledge of the prey's typical escape behavior in the forest environment. The prey species that chimpanzees hunt varies across their geographic range in ways that reflect the prey available in each habitat and the social learning that transmits hunting preferences and techniques across generations within communities. The red colobus preference at Thai forest is a learned cultural tradition, maintained across generations by the social learning of individual hunters and transmitted from experienced hunters to less experienced ones through observation and participation in hunts. Communities where the red colobus is not available hunt different prey species, with adaptations in technique that reflect the different defensive behaviors of the alternative prey. The cultural transmission of hunting technique is one of the clearest examples of behavioral culture in chimpanzee populations, and the comparison of hunting techniques between communities that hunt the same prey species is one of the most informative sources of data on the variation in chimpanzee behavioral culture that is not attributable to differences in the physical environment. The evolutionary significance of chimpanzee cooperative hunting for understanding the origins of human hunting behavior is a topic that the behavioral ecology literature has engaged with extensively, and the engagement has produced a set of hypotheses about the cognitive and behavioral prerequisites for cooperative hunting that illuminate both chimpanzee and human evolution. The hypothesis that cooperative hunting drove the expansion of social cognition in the human lineage by selecting for the ability to represent and respond to the behavior of multiple social partners simultaneously in a dynamic and high-stakes behavioral context is one of the frameworks that the Thai forest hunting data has been used to support. The chimpanzee's cooperative hunting provides a model of what non-human primate cooperative behavior looks like, and the comparison between the chimpanzee model and the human hunter-gatherer ethnographic record illuminates the behavioral and cognitive differences between the two that the 6 million years of separate evolution have produced. The monkey that the hunting group was watching at the beginning of this video did not escape. The blocker closed the route it chose to flee along. The ambusher was at the point it reached when the blocker forced the change of direction. And the capture, when it came, was rapid and decisive in the way that the captures at Thai forest have been documented across 40 years of behavioral observation. The carcass was distributed in the pattern that the Thai forest hunting tradition has maintained across the decades of the research program's monitoring. The individuals who contributed most received the most. The social relationships of the group were reinforced and extended by the distribution, and the forest around the hunting group returned to the ordinary activity of a chimpanzee community after a successful hunt. The foraging, the grooming, the social interactions that fill the hours between the events that the research record marks as behaviorally significant. The hunt was over. The social consequences of the hunt continued. Sleep well. The female chimpanzees at Thai forest participated in hunts at lower rates than the males, but their participation was not absent. And the analysis of female hunting behavior at Thai produced findings that complicated the simple account of chimpanzee hunting as a male behavioral phenomenon. Females with dependent offspring rarely participated in active hunts because the demands of the chase and the risks of the pursuit were incompatible with carrying or monitoring a dependent infant. But females without dependent offspring and older females whose offspring were already independent participated in hunts at rates that approached the male rates, and their behavioral contributions to the coordinated hunts that they joined were comparable to the behavioral contributions of the male participants who occupied similar roles. The hunting behavior is not a male-exclusive behavioral system in the way that the intergroup violence described in this channel's previous series is a male-dominated system. It is a behavioral system that the community's males maintain most actively, but that the females participate in and benefit from in ways that the research has documented in enough detail to complicate the simple picture. The acoustic behavior of the hunting group during the hunt is one of the most studied and most revealing dimensions of the cooperative hunting phenomenon. The silence that characterizes the approach to the prey, which the observer at the beginning of this video noted as the behavioral signature that distinguished the hunting group from a group in ordinary foraging mode, is maintained with a consistency that suggests active suppression of the normal vocal behavior of the group rather than simply a lull in activity. Chimpanzees in a foraging group produce a continuous stream of vocalizations that maintain contact between individuals spread across the forest. The hunting group maintains its spatial coordination through visual monitoring and through the subtle postural and movement signals that the Boish research documented, rather than through the vocalizations that would alert the prey to the group's presence and coordination. The transition from vocal to visual coordination is itself a behavioral achievement that requires each individual to shift from its normal communication mode to a mode that is behaviorally demanding and that requires sustained attention to the visual signals of partners who may be at the limits of visual range. The Gombe hunting data, which comes from the research programs that Jane Goodall established in the 1960s and that have been continued by her successors, shows a different pattern from the Thai forest data in ways that have been the subject of sustained comparative analysis. At Gombe, the hunts are less coordinated, the success rates are lower, and the meat distribution is more strongly controlled by the dominance hierarchy rather than by the contribution of individuals to the hunt. The comparison between Gombe and Thai has been interpreted as evidence of cultural variation in hunting behavior between communities, with the Thai forest hunters having developed a more sophisticated and more productive cooperative tradition than the Gombe hunters through the cultural transmission processes that maintain behavioral traditions in chimpanzee populations. But it has also been interpreted as reflecting ecological differences between the two sites that produce different optimal hunting strategies, with the denser canopy and different colobus behavior at Thai forest favoring a more coordinated approach than the more open woodland habitat at Gombe requires. The Ngogo chimpanzee community in Kibale National Park, whose intergroup violence was described in this channel's series on chimpanzee warfare, also provided important data on chimpanzee hunting behavior from a community whose large size created a natural experiment in how hunting group composition affects hunting success. The Ngogo community's hunts, which involved some of the largest hunting groups documented in the chimpanzee research literature, produced success rates and prey capture rates per hunter that illuminated the relationship between group size and hunting efficiency. The data showed that hunting success increased with group size, up to a point beyond which adding more hunters did not further improve the outcome. A pattern consistent with the theoretical expectation that cooperative benefits are maximized at an intermediate group size that covers the essential roles without producing the coordination costs of an excessively large group. The nutritional contribution of hunting to the chimpanzee diet has been measured at the long-term research sites through the analysis of the meat consumption rates of the communities and the caloric content of the prey animals that the communities hunt. The results show that meat constitutes a relatively small fraction of the total caloric intake of chimpanzee communities, even at the sites where hunting is most frequent, typically less than 5% of the total diet across the year. But the temporal distribution of meat consumption is highly uneven, with periods of intensive hunting when meat consumption is a more significant fraction of the diet, alternating with long periods when hunting is rare or absent. The concentrated nature of the nutritional contribution of hunting, combined with the high social and reproductive value of meat possession, makes hunting a behaviorally important activity even when it is not a major contributor to the total caloric budget of the community. The tool use that some chimpanzee populations have been documented using in the context of hunting, including the use of sharpened sticks to probe for and extract galagos from tree cavities at the Fongoli site in Senegal, adds another dimension to the chimpanzee hunting story that the Thai forest cooperative hunting model does not capture. The Fongoli hunting with tools, documented by Jill Proutz and her colleagues, involves the modification of a stick by removing leaves and side branches and sometimes sharpening the tip, by stripping the bark with the teeth, followed by thrusting the stick into a tree cavity where a galago is sheltering. The tool use is not cooperative in the way that the Thai forest hunting is cooperative, but it represents a different kind of behavioral sophistication, the use of a modified object to extend the chimpanzee's physical reach into a microhabitat that its unaided body cannot access, in pursuit of prey that it cannot otherwise capture. The comparison between the chimpanzee's cooperative hunting and the cooperative hunting of other species that show analogous behavior illuminates what is and is not distinctive about the chimpanzee's approach. Wolves hunt cooperatively and show role differentiation in their hunts, with some individuals driving prey toward others who make the capture. Killer whales hunt cooperatively with a degree of coordination that exceeds the chimpanzees in some respects, with documented techniques that involve the coordinated herding of prey into positions where capture is possible, including the wave washing of seals off ice floes by coordinated groups. The comparison with these other cooperative hunters suggests that the cognitive requirements for cooperative hunting do not uniquely require the social cognition that the debate about shared intentionality in chimpanzee hunting has focused on, and that the convergent evolution of cooperative hunting in multiple lineages reflects the adaptive value of the behavior rather than a shared cognitive architecture. The long-term research on Thai forest chimpanzee hunting has produced as a secondary finding a detailed picture of individual variation in hunting skill and hunting frequency that illuminates the behavioral ecology of the phenomenon at the level of individual decision-making. The most skilled hunters in the Thai forest community, the individuals who most frequently occupied the demanding roles of blocker and ambusher, and who contributed most to the success of the hunts they participated in, were also the individuals who benefited most from meat distribution in the post-hunt period. The correlation between skill, contribution, and benefit that the Thai forest data documents is one of the most informative findings in the cooperative hunting literature, because it shows that the incentive structure of the Thai forest hunting system rewards the individuals who contribute most, and therefore provides the individual level incentive for the development and maintenance of hunting skill across the lifetimes of the individuals who participate in the hunts. The evolutionary argument that connects chimpanzee cooperative hunting to human hunter-gatherer behavior runs through the comparison of the cognitive and social prerequisites for for the two behavioral systems. The human hunter-gatherer hunting parties, documented in the ethnographic literature, show a level of coordination, communication, and division of labor that substantially exceeds the chimpanzees' cooperative hunting, including the use of language for explicit planning before the hunt, the use of tools and technology for both the hunt and the processing of prey, and the sharing of meat across the community, rather than only among the hunting participants. But the chimpanzee cooperative hunting provides a model of what cooperative hunting looks like before these distinctively human elaborations were added. And the comparison between the model and the human version illuminates what changed in the cognitive and social architecture of hunting across the 6 million years of separate evolution that separate the two lineages. The red colobus monkey at the center of the Thai forest hunting story is not a passive actor in the behavioral system that the chimpanzee hunting has shaped. The red colobus populations at Thai forest have been hunted by the chimpanzee community for longer than the research program has been monitoring them and the colobus behavioral responses to chimpanzee presence, including the alarm calls that the colobus produce when they detect chimpanzees and the fleeing behavior that the detection triggers, are behavioral patterns that the evolutionary history of predator-prey interaction between the two species has refined. The arms race between chimpanzee hunting technique and colobus anti-predator behavior is one of the evolutionary dynamics that has driven the development of the coordinated hunting strategy. A less coordinated attack on a colobus group is more easily countered by the colobus's defensive behavior, and the coordination of the chimpanzee hunt is in part a response to the defensive sophistication of the prey. The dark truth about how chimpanzees hunt is not that the hunt is violent, though it is. It is that the hunt is social in a way that changes what it means to call it hunting at all. The coordination between the hunters, the communication through posture and movement rather than sound, the role differentiation that places the right individual in the right position at the right moment, and the distribution of the outcome in ways that reward contribution and build the social relationships that make the next hunt possible, are all dimensions of a behavioral system whose sophistication the single word hunting does not capture. The chimpanzee that positions itself at the predicted escape point of a prey animal before the prey has yet begun to flee is a chimpanzee that is representing a future state, planning a behavior in response to that representation and executing the plan in coordination with partners who are simultaneously representing their own future states and planning their own behaviors in response. Whether this constitutes the shared intentionality that human cooperation involves is the question the field is still answering. What it constitutes, at the minimum, is one of the most behaviorally complex and most cognitively demanding activities in the repertoire of any non-human species. Sleep well. The research on Thai forest hunting that Christoph and Hedwig Boesch began in 1979 is still producing data. The community they have been monitoring for more than 40 years has changed in its composition, its social structure, and its hunting patterns across the decades of continuous observation, and the long-term data set that the research program has assembled is one of the most comprehensive behavioral records of a wild chimpanzee community that exists. The hunters who were documented in the early years of the research are known to the research record by name, and the trajectories of individual hunting careers, from the first participation as an adolescent observer to the peak hunting years of early adulthood to the reduced participation of later life, are traceable in the data for individuals who have been monitored across their entire adult lifespans. What the data shows is not just how chimpanzees hunt, it is how individual chimpanzees live as hunters, in a social community that has organized itself around the hunt as one of the central behavioral activities of the male life course. Sleep well. The forest at Thai is quieter now than it was when the Boeschs arrived in 1979. The pressures of habitat loss and human disturbance have reduced the size of the chimpanzee population that the forest can support, and the hunting community that the research has been monitoring is smaller than it was at the peak of the program's documentation. The hunts still happen. The coordination is still there. The meat is still distributed in the pattern that the decades of research have documented. But the community that is conducting the hunts today is conducting them in a forest that is under pressure in ways that the Boeschs did not anticipate when they began their work. and the conservation implications of the habitat loss for the hunting behavior that the research has revealed are part of the story that the long-term program is still recording. The hunt is one of the most remarkable behavioral phenomena in the natural world. The world that contains it is getting smaller. Sleep well. The processing of the prey after the capture is a behavioral sequence that the Thai forest research has documented in detail, and it illuminates the relationship between the hunting behavior and the social structure of the community in ways that the hunt itself does not fully expose. The individual who makes the capture typically begins consuming the prey immediately, while the other participants in the hunt gather around and begin presenting behaviors that request access to the meat. The begging behavior, which involves extending a hand toward the meat possessor with a palm-up posture that the research has identified as a sharing request signal across great ape species, is produced by the hunting participants in a pattern that reflects their hunting contribution and their social relationship with the meat possessor. The meat possessor responds to the sharing requests selectively, distributing pieces of meat to some individuals and not others in a pattern that the research has analyzed as reflecting the social dynamics of the group as well as the contribution of each individual to the hunt. The observation that chimpanzees at Thai forest share meat more equitably among hunting participants than the dominance hierarchy alone would predict has been one of the most behaviorally significant findings of the Thai research program, because it suggests that the meat distribution is governed by a norm of reciprocity related to hunting contribution rather than simply by the power dynamics of the dominance hierarchy. The alpha male at Thai does not simply take the entire carcass and distribute it at his discretion, as the dominance-based model of chimpanzee social behavior might predict. He is constrained by the expectations of the individuals who contributed to the hunt, and the distribution that results reflects those expectations in a way that the research has documented quantitatively across many hunts. Whether this constitutes a genuine norm in the cognitive sense, an internalized behavioral rule that the participants expect each other to follow, is a question that the behavioral evidence supports but does not definitively resolve. The comparative data on meat sharing across the great apes illuminates the chimpanzee's cooperative hunting behavior by placing it in the context of the broader evolution of food sharing in the primate order. Bonobos share food extensively, including plant foods that chimpanzees do not typically share, but their food sharing is not tied to a hunting context in the way that chimpanzee meat sharing is. Gorillas do not share food. Orangutans do not share food. The chimpanzee's meat sharing, and its connection to the cooperative hunting behavior that produces the meat, is therefore a behavioral complex that appears to be derived within the great ape lineage rather than ancestral to it, and whose evolutionary origins are connected to the evolution of cooperative hunting as a social strategy in the chimpanzee lineage. The research on chimpanzee hunting has produced, as a methodological legacy, a set of behavioral observation and analysis techniques that have been applied to the study of cooperative behavior in other species and that have advanced the comparative study of social behavior well beyond the chimpanzee literature. The detailed observation protocols for documenting role differentiation in cooperative hunts, the analytical frameworks for distinguishing genuine cooperation from pseudo-cooperation in group hunting contexts, and the comparative approach that places the chimpanzee's behavior in the context of the broader evolutionary history of cooperative behavior across taxa are all methodological contributions that the Thai Forest Research Program and the debate it generated have made to behavioral ecology more broadly. The science of chimpanzee hunting has made the science of cooperative behavior better. The chimpanzee in the Thai forest who positions himself at the ambush point in the silence of the coordinated hunt, waiting for the prey that has not yet begun to flee, is doing something that the behavioral science has spent 40 years trying to understand, and that the understanding has made more remarkable rather than less. The animal is representing a future state of the world, a state in which the prey will have fled in a direction that the animal can predict, and it is placing itself in that future state's context before the future state has occurred. Whether this constitutes genuine prospective cognition, the ability to mentally represent and act on a future that has not yet arrived, is a question that the cognitive science of animal behavior is still working to resolve. What is not in question is that the behavior produces the outcome that the prospective cognition hypothesis predicts. The ambusher is at the right place at the right time, and the prey does not escape. Sleep well. The dark truth about how chimpanzees hunt is also a truth about what hunting requires. It requires the ability to represent what another individual is doing and to coordinate your own behavior in response. It requires the suppression of the normal communicative behavior of the group in favor of a silent coordination that relies on visual monitoring rather than vocalizations. It requires the prediction of prey behavior well enough to position yourself in advance of where the prey will be rather than simply following where the prey has been. And it requires the social framework of a community in which the outcome of the cooperative effort is distributed in ways that reward the contributors and provide the incentive for future cooperation. These are not simple requirements. They are the cognitive and social prerequisites for one of the most sophisticated behavioral achievements in the non-human animal world, and the chimpanzees of the Thai forest have been meeting them, hunt after hunt, for longer than the research program that documented them has been running. Sleep well. The monkey that was hunted at the beginning of this video, the red colobus that the coordinated group of chimpanzees surrounded and captured in the Thai forest canopy, is one of the thousands of prey animals that the Thai forest hunting tradition has produced across the 40 years of the research program's documentation. Each hunt is a behavioral event in the life of the community, a social and cognitive achievement that reflects the behavioral sophistication of the hunters and the social structure of the group that organizes and benefits from the hunt. The research that has documented these events has produced one of the most detailed pictures of cooperative behavior in a non-human species that the behavioral sciences have ever assembled. What the picture shows is an animal that hunts not just because it is hungry, but because it is social, and that has organized its social life around the hunt in ways that illuminate the evolutionary origins of the social complexity that the research on chimpanzees has been revealing for 60 years. Sleep well. The caloric value of the red colobus monkey that the Thai forest hunting group captures on a successful hunt is a number that the nutritional ecology research has measured, approximately 4,000 to 6,000 kilocalories per adult colobus, distributed across the hunting group and the community members who receive shares. This is not a trivial nutritional input for the individuals who receive the largest portions. For a female with a dependent offspring, a large portion of colobus meat can represent a significant fraction of the protein intake for a day or more. For a male who has been hunting intensively, the caloric and protein content of his share rewards the physical demands of the chase and the positioning that the hunt required. The nutritional logic of the hunt is inseparable from the social logic of the hunt, and both together produce the behavioral system that the research program has been documenting since 1979. The voice of the Thai forest at the moment of a successful hunt is one of the most dramatic acoustic events that the behavioral research has documented, because the silence of the hunt breaks the moment the capture is made in an eruption of vocalizations that carry across the forest and bring community members from throughout the range toward the location of the kill. The food calls that the successful hunters produce, and the excited vocalizations of the community members who hear the calls and begin moving toward the source, are the acoustic announcement that the hunt has succeeded and that meat distribution is beginning. The contrast between the prolonged silence of the approach and the explosive acoustic output of the successful capture is one of the behavioral signatures of the chimpanzee hunt that the research has documented most vividly, and it captures something essential about what the hunt is: a behavioral system built around the management of information, suppressing the community's normal acoustic output during the approach and releasing it at the moment when the outcome is secured. The Thai forest in the late afternoon, after a successful hunt, is a forest where the social life of the chimpanzee community has been reorganized around the event of the capture. The meat possessors are surrounded by beggars. The most recent hunt's participants are demonstrating the social relationships that the hunt has built and the claims that their contribution entitles them to make. And the community members who were not part of the hunt are negotiating their access to the distribution through the social currency of grooming, coalition support, and the prior relationships they have built with the meat possessors. The hunt is over, but its social consequences are still unfolding, in the forest and in the social structure of the community, for the hours and days that follow. What the behavioral research has documented across 40 years of watching this process is not just how chimpanzees hunt, it is how the hunt makes the community sleep well. The debate about shared intentionality in chimpanzee cooperation, which this video described in the context of the Bush and Tomasello disagreement, has produced a productive research program in comparative cognition that has tested the boundaries of the chimpanzee's cooperative capacity in laboratory settings designed to address the questions that the field data raised. The results have been mixed in ways that reflect the genuine difficulty of the question. Chimpanzees in some laboratory cooperative tasks show behavior consistent with genuine joint intentionality, while in others they show behavior consistent with the parallel pursuit of individual goals that happens to produce a coordinated outcome. The complexity of the findings mirrors the complexity of the behavioral phenomenon that the debate was motivated by, and it suggests that the question of shared intentionality in chimpanzee cooperation is not a simple yes or no question, but a question about the conditions under which the different levels of social coordination that the chimpanzee is capable of are expressed. The night falls on the Thai forest, and the chimpanzees who spent the afternoon in the social aftermath of the day's hunt are in their nests. The colobus groups whose territory overlaps with the chimpanzee community's range are higher in the canopy than they were this morning, in the positions that the night's safety requires. The forest holds both communities, the hunters and the hunted, in the same darkness that conceals and connects them. What happens between them tomorrow morning, whether the chimpanzees will hunt again and whether the colobus will successfully evade them, is part of the ongoing behavioral story that the research program has been following for 40 years, and that will continue for as long as the forest that contains them continues to exist. The hunt is one of the most remarkable events in that story. The forest is what makes the story possible. Sleep well. In 1975, a researcher named Frans de Waal arrived at a chimpanzee colony at Arnhem Zoo in the Netherlands. The colony had been established 4 years earlier and contained 23 chimpanzees living in a large outdoor enclosure. De Waal was there to study chimpanzee social behavior. What he found over the next 6 years changed how behavioral science understood the relationship between primate politics and human politics. The alpha male, when de Waal arrived, was a chimpanzee named Yeroen. Yeroen had held the alpha position for several years, maintaining his dominance through a combination of physical intimidation and what de Waal would eventually describe as coalition management. The strategic cultivation of allies whose support made his position more stable than his individual physical capability alone would have sustained. Then a younger and physically stronger male named Louis began challenging him. Subscribe right now and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that button now. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this channel going. Drop a comment right now telling us where in the world you are watching from and what time it is. We read every single one. What followed at Arnhem over the next several years was the behavioral sequence that de Waal would eventually describe in his 1982 book as Chimpanzee Politics. The book used that word deliberately, not as a metaphor and not as an analogy. De Waal's argument was that the social behavior of the Arnhem chimpanzees, the coalition formation, the strategic alliance management, the deception and counter-deception, the reconciliation after conflict, and the manipulation of social relationships to achieve competitive ends was politics in the same functional sense that human political behavior is politics. The mechanisms were different. The cognitive elaboration was different. But the underlying behavioral logic, the use of social relationships as a competitive resource, was the same. The succession struggle at Arnhem that de Waal documented in detail began when Louis, the younger and physically stronger male, started producing alliance-building behaviors directed at the females and the lower-ranking males of the colony in ways that were distinct from his ordinary social behavior. He groomed individuals he had previously ignored. He supported individuals in conflicts where he had previously remained neutral. He was, in de Waal's analysis, building the social coalition that would allow him to challenge Yeroen despite Yeroen's established dominance and established alliances. The challenge when it came was not a single decisive fight. It was a series of escalating confrontations, displays, and coalition tests that played out over months. The outcome of each confrontation was determined not just by the physical capabilities of the two males involved, but by the support or the neutrality of the other colony members at the moment of the confrontation. A confrontation in which Luit had the support of several high-ranking females was a confrontation that Yaron could not win through physical dominance alone, because the females would intervene against him or prevent him from completing an attack. A confrontation in which Yaron had successfully recruited female support before the engagement began was a confrontation that Luit could not escalate without risking defeat despite his physical advantage. The females of the Arnhem colony, whose role in the succession struggle de Waal documented in detail, were not passive observers of a male competition. They were active participants in the social dynamics that determined the outcome, and their collective support or opposition was the resource that both males were competing for as much as they were competing against each other directly. The female coalition that would tip the balance of the succession was the prize that the male's alliance-building behavior was directed at acquiring, and the management of female relationships was as important to the outcome of the succession as the management of male alliances. Luit eventually achieved the alpha position after a period of sustained alliance building and confrontation. But the story did not end there, and the continuation of the story is what makes the Arnhem data so important for understanding chimpanzee politics. The deposed Yaron, rather than disappearing from relevance after losing the alpha position, formed a coalition with a third male named Nicky, who was younger than both Luit and Yaron and who had his own ambitions for the alpha position. The coalition between the deposed alpha and the ambitious young male produced a combined social force that exceeded what either could field alone, and the coalition eventually enabled Nicky to displace Luit from the alpha position. The structure of the Yaron-Nicky coalition was one that de Waal analyzed as a bargain. Nicky provided the physical presence and the willingness to challenge Luit that Yaron could no longer provide alone, and Yaron provided the social experience, the established relationships, and the strategic intelligence that Nicky lacked as a younger and less experienced social actor. Each contributed what the other lacked, and the combined force of their coalition exceeded what either could field independently. This is not a description that behavioral science would have applied to chimpanzee social behavior before the Arnhem data changed the theoretical framework. The deception that de Waal documented at Arnhem was perhaps the most striking finding in the chimpanzee politics data, because deception requires a model of what another individual knows or believes that is different from what is actually the case, and the attribution of this level of social cognition to chimpanzees was one of the most contested theoretical claims in comparative psychology at the time. The behavioral evidence for deception at Arnhem included cases where a subordinate male concealed the physical sign of sexual arousal when a dominant male entered the area, cases where individuals displayed only when they were positioned so that a dominant animal could not see them, and cases where a male produced reconciliation behavior toward a rival in public that his behavior in private suggested was not a genuine expression of changed social intent. Whether these behaviors constitute deception in the cognitively rich sense, requiring a genuine representation of what the other individual believes, or whether they are better explained by simpler behavioral mechanisms, is a question that the debate in comparative psychology has been engaged with since de Waal published the Arnhem data. The reconciliation behavior that de Waal documented at Arnhem, which he later developed into a major research program on conflict resolution in primates, was the finding that had the broadest impact on behavioral science beyond the question of chimpanzee politics. De Waal observed that chimpanzees who had been in conflict frequently engaged in affiliative behaviors, including embracing, kissing, and grooming in the minutes to hours following a confrontation, at rates substantially higher than the baseline affiliative rates between individuals who had not been in recent conflict. The post-conflict affiliative behavior, which de Waal named reconciliation, appeared to serve the function of repairing the social relationship damaged by the conflict, and the research program that de Waal developed around this observation has produced one of the most extensive comparative databases on conflict resolution in primates and other social animals. The political behavior of chimpanzees in wild populations, which the long-term field research at Gombe, Kibale, and Thai Forest has documented across decades of observation, shows the same basic structure as the Arnhem data, while revealing dimensions of the behavior that the captive colony setting could not expose. The wild chimpanzee's alpha position is maintained through the same combination of physical intimidation, coalition management, and strategic relationship cultivation that the Arnhem males demonstrated, but in the context of a ranging community whose members are spread across several square kilometers of forest and whose social interactions are distributed across the landscape rather than concentrated in the bounded space of an enclosure. The political behavior in the wild is therefore conducted at longer range, through the communication systems of vocalizations and displays that carry across the forest, and through the social interactions that occur during the daily encounters of foraging and travel, rather than in the concentrated social encounters of the captive colony. The relationship between the alpha male's dominance and his reproductive success, which is the evolutionary payoff that the behavioral ecology framework proposes, as the ultimate explanation for the political behavior, has been measured in the wild populations through the combination of behavioral observation and genetic paternity analysis that the long-term research programs have made possible. The results show that the alpha male does achieve elevated reproductive success relative to lower-ranking males, but the relationship is not as direct or as exclusive as the dominance-based model of primate reproduction would predict. High-ranking males, other than the alpha, also achieve substantial reproductive success, and in some communities the alpha's advantage over the second and third-ranking males is smaller than the behavioral dominance hierarchy would suggest. The political behavior is not purely about exclusive reproductive access. It is about social position in a competitive landscape where reproductive success is influenced by many variables, and where the management of the social landscape, through coalition building and strategic relationship cultivation, produces outcomes that the management of physical dominance alone does not. The cognitive requirements of chimpanzee political behavior are among the most extensively studied questions in comparative cognitive science, because the behavioral evidence from Arnhem and from the wild research populations suggests a level of social intelligence that challenges the simplified accounts of primate cognition that preceded de Waal's observations. The ability to track the social relationships between third parties, to use this tracking to identify potential allies and potential threats in the competitive social landscape, to manage one's own relationships strategically in light of this tracking, and to engage in the deception and the counter-deception that the Arnhem data documented are all cognitive capabilities that require a social representational system of considerable sophistication. The research on the cognitive architecture underlying these capabilities has been one of the most productive areas in comparative psychology since the Arnhem data made the capabilities visible. The Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis, proposed by Andrew Whiten and Richard Byrne in 1988, argued that the social complexity of primate groups was the primary selective force for the expansion of primate intelligence, and that the cognitive capabilities required for the political behavior documented by de Waal at Arnhem were the evolutionary product of selection for social intelligence in competitive primate groups. The hypothesis has been one of the most influential theoretical frameworks in comparative cognitive science, generating research on social cognition in a wide range of species and producing a substantial empirical literature on the relationship between social complexity and cognitive complexity across taxa. The chimpanzee's political behavior was the primary behavioral evidence that motivated the hypothesis, and the hypothesis has in turn shaped how the behavioral evidence has been interpreted and what new evidence has been sought. The dark truth about chimpanzee politics is that it is not metaphorically political. It is functionally political in the sense that the behavioral science has defined the use of social relationships as a competitive resource, the strategic management of alliances and coalitions, the deception and reconciliation that maintain the social fabric while pursuing competitive ends. and the relationship between social position and reproductive success that provides the evolutionary motivation for the political behavior. The chimpanzee alpha, who grooms his allies, manages the coalition that supports his position, and reconciles with rivals after confrontations, is doing something that the word politics captures better than the word aggression. Because the politics is the primary behavioral system, and the aggression is one tool within it. What Diwal saw at Arnhem in 1975 was politics in action. The 50 years of research that followed has confirmed that what he saw was real, consistent across populations, and connected to the evolutionary history of social intelligence in a lineage that includes both chimpanzees and the species that Diwal's book implicitly suggested had inherited the same behavioral system and elaborated it into the human political landscape. Sleep well. The wild chimpanzee politics at Gombe has been documented across a timeline that now spans more than 60 years, and the succession events in the alpha male position that the research has recorded across this time provide the longest continuous record of political dynamics in any non-human primate population. The successions at Gombe show the same basic pattern documented at Arnhem. The challenger who builds a coalition before directly confronting the incumbent, the role of female support in determining the outcome of confrontations, and the post-succession behavior of the deposed alpha that ranges from continued participation in the community's social life at a reduced status to complete departure from the community in some cases. The Gombe record shows that the political dynamics of the chimpanzee community are not episodic events that occur during succession struggles and then return to stability. They are continuous features of the community's social life, with the management of social relationships and the competitive positioning of individuals ongoing at all times, even during periods when the alpha position is not actively contested. The role of grooming in the political economy of the chimpanzee community is one of the behavioral dimensions of chimpanzee politics that the research has analyzed most quantitatively because grooming produces a behavioral record. The time spent grooming each partner and the reciprocity of grooming between dyads that can be measured and analyzed in relation to the social outcomes that the grooming is proposed to produce. The analysis of grooming patterns in chimpanzee communities has found that grooming is not distributed randomly across social partners, but is concentrated in the dyadic relationships that are most socially strategic for the grooming individual. That grooming investment predicts coalition support in subsequent conflicts, and that the grooming behavior of high-ranking males is more strategically targeted at individuals whose support is most valuable for maintaining their position than the grooming of lower-ranking individuals whose social leverage is less. The grooming network of the community is, in this analysis, a map of the political alliances of the community, with the investment of grooming time showing who has invested in whose support. The female political behavior in chimpanzee communities, which is less studied than male political behavior, partly because the more dramatic succession struggles involve primarily males, is nevertheless a genuine dimension of chimpanzee social life that the research has begun to document in detail at sites where long-term observation has made the female social dynamics as well documented as the male dynamics. Female chimpanzees maintain dominance hierarchies that influence their access to food resources, their social interactions with males, and the social environment that their offspring experience during development. The dominance relationships between females are typically less actively contested than the dominance relationships between males, and the displays and coalitions that characterize male dominance competition are less prominent in female interactions. But the social relationships between females and the ways in which females manage those relationships to achieve their social and reproductive goals reflect the same underlying behavioral logic that Diwal identified in the male political behavior at Arnhem. The Niki-Yerowan coalition at Arnhem, which this video described in the context of the succession from Luit to Niki, produced the most dramatic example of chimpanzee political behavior that the behavioral science has documented, because the outcome of the coalition revealed a form of strategic alliance that requires each party to represent the interests of the other and to manage the alliance in ways that maintain the mutual benefit that sustains it. Nicky, as the alpha male produced by the coalition, was dependent on Yarowen's continued support for the maintenance of his position, because his individual physical capability was not sufficient to maintain dominance against the combined opposition of Luit and other potential challengers without Yarowen's backing. Yarowen, as the strategic partner who enabled Nicky's ascension, was dependent on Nicky's willingness to reciprocate the support by allowing Yarowen continued access to mating opportunities that his reduced rank would otherwise have denied him. The mutual dependency of the coalition was the mechanism that maintained it, and the management of that dependency was the political work that both males were continuously engaged in. The destabilization of the Nicky-Yarowen coalition, which eventually occurred and which produced one of the most disturbing events in the Arnhem research record, illustrates the fragility of political alliances that are based on mutual dependency rather than genuine affiliation. When the coalition broke down, the consequences for the individuals involved were severe in ways that the behavioral description of the breakdown does not prepare the reader for. The details of the breakdown, which involved physical violence between males who had been political allies, illuminated the stakes of chimpanzee political behavior in a way that the preceding description of the social maneuvering had not fully conveyed. The politics could break down into something more direct, and when it did, the consequences could be irreversible. The Arnhem research record preserves this dimension of chimpanzee political life alongside the more analytically tractable dimensions of coalition formation and succession dynamics. The research on chimpanzee political behavior that has been conducted in the decades since de Waal published the Arnhem data has substantially expanded the evidence base beyond the single captive colony that motivated the original theoretical framework. The wild population data from Gombe, Kibale, Thai Forest, and other long-term research sites has confirmed that the political dynamics documented at Arnhem are genuine features of chimpanzee social behavior rather than artifacts of the captive setting. And the cross-site comparative analysis of political behavior has revealed the degree to which the basic structure of the behavior is consistent across populations and habitats, while the surface details vary in ways that reflect local social and ecological conditions. The alpha-male succession dynamics at Kibale differ from those at Gombe in their timeline and in the coalition configurations that successful successions involve. But the underlying logic of the behavior, the use of social relationships as a competitive resource, is consistent across sites. The attention that chimpanzee political behavior has attracted from political scientists and philosophers, as well as from behavioral scientists, reflects the degree to which the behavioral phenomena documented by de Waal are recognized as genuinely relevant to understanding human political behavior. The comparison between the coalition dynamics at Arnhem and the coalition dynamics of human political institutions, which de Waal himself drew in the book that introduced the Arnhem data to a broad audience, has been developed in subsequent work by political scientists who have found the chimpanzee model useful for thinking about the behavioral foundations of human political institutions. The comparison is not a claim that human politics is simply chimpanzee politics elaborated by language and culture. It is a claim that the behavioral logic that human political institutions are built on, the use of social relationships as a competitive resource, has evolutionary roots that the chimpanzee political behavior illuminates, in the same way that the chimpanzee cooperative hunting illuminates the evolutionary roots of human cooperative behavior. The consolation behavior that de Waal documented at Arnhem, which involves a third party approaching and comforting an individual who has been involved in a conflict, is one of the behavioral findings from the Arnhem research that has the broadest implications for understanding the evolutionary origins of empathy and social support in primates. The consolation behavior at Arnhem showed that bystanders were not neutral observers of conflicts between other individuals, but were responsive to the emotional states of the conflict participants in ways that produced affiliative interventions directed at reducing the distress of the affected individual. The research that de Waal subsequently developed around consolation and empathy in great apes has produced one of the most extensive comparative empirical literatures on the evolution of empathy in primates, connecting the political behavior of the Arnhem colony to the broader question of what the emotional and social foundations of primate social life are. The behavioral sequence that follows the loss of the alpha position is one of the most revealing dimensions of chimpanzee political life, because it shows how the community responds to the change in the competitive landscape that a succession produces. The deposed alpha does not simply disappear from the community's social life. In most documented successions at wild research sites, the former alpha remains in the community and negotiates a new social position that reflects the changed competitive landscape. This negotiation involves the management of the relationship with the new alpha, whose tolerance of the former alpha's continued presence in the community is itself a political variable that the former alpha must manage. The grooming that a former alpha directs toward the new alpha and the submission behaviors that he produces in the new alpha's presence are the behavioral currency through which the former alpha purchases his continued inclusion in the community at a reduced but sustainable social position. The alpha's relationship with the females of the community, which is one of the primary social resources that the alpha position provides access to, changes dramatically after a succession, and the behavioral adjustment that the former alpha makes to the new landscape of female access is one of the most sensitive indicators of the political dynamics of the post-succession period. The former alpha, who had priority access to mating with cycling females during his tenure, must now compete for this access at a disadvantage, and the social strategies he employs to maintain some mating success, despite his reduced rank, are part of the political behavior that the post-succession period reveals. The coalition with other males that may provide access to mating opportunities despite reduced individual rank, the continued management of female social relationships that may provide mating opportunities outside the direct control of the new alpha, and the strategic timing of mating attempts when the new alpha's attention is occupied elsewhere are all behaviors that the research has documented in deposed alphas at multiple research sites. The Bossou chimpanzee community in Guinea, which has been studied by Tetsuro Matsuzawa and his colleagues since the 1970s, has provided some of the most detailed data on chimpanzee political behavior in a small community context. Because the Bossou community's small size, which rarely exceeds 20 individuals, makes the social dynamics of the community more accessible to detailed individual-level observation than the larger communities at sites like Kibale or Ngogo. The political dynamics at Bossou are driven by the same behavioral logic as the larger communities, but are expressed in the social interactions of a smaller set of individuals. And the analysis of the political behavior at Bossou has illuminated how the structural features of the coalition and succession dynamics that De Waal documented at Arnhem operate in the context of a wild population with the ecological and demographic pressures that the captive colony setting does not replicate. The implications of chimpanzee political behavior for understanding the evolutionary origins of human political institutions are implications that the behavioral science has engaged with carefully, because the comparison requires moving across a large cognitive and institutional gap that the behavioral similarities do not bridge automatically. The chimpanzee coalition is built through grooming and direct social interaction between individuals who know each other personally. The human political coalition can be built through institutions, laws, economic relationships, and ideological commitments that connect individuals who have never met and who may never meet. The behavioral logic of using social relationships as a competitive resource is shared. The cognitive and institutional architecture through which that logic is expressed in the human case is not. The research legacy of Frans de Waal, who began his career at Arnhem and who spent the subsequent decades developing the theoretical and empirical framework of the behavioral science of primate social life, is a legacy that extends far beyond the Arnhem research. The concept of reconciliation, the comparative research on empathy and consolation, the political intelligence framework, and the connection between primate social behavior and the evolutionary origins of human morality and political institutions that De Waal developed in his subsequent books and research programs all have their foundation in the 6 years that De Waal spent watching Yeroen and Louit and Nikki manage their social relationships in the Arnhem enclosure. What he saw there changed what behavioral science understood about what social behavior is and what it is for, and the research programs that his observations motivated have produced some of the most important findings in comparative behavioral science of the last 50 years. The dark truth about chimpanzee politics is also a truth about what the word politics actually means when you strip away the institutional elaborations that human culture has added to the underlying behavioral system. At its core, politics is the use of social relationships to achieve competitive ends in a social environment where individual capability alone is insufficient to achieve those ends. This is what Jeroen was doing when he cultivated the alliances that maintained his alpha position against the challenge of a physically stronger rival. This is what Louis was doing when he built the coalition that displaced Jeroen. This is what the Nicky-Jeroen partnership was doing when it combined the physical presence of one and the social experience of the other into a coalition that exceeded what either could achieve alone. And this is what the chimpanzee alpha males at Gombe, Kibale, and Thai Forest are doing every day in the management of their social relationships and their competitive positioning. The word politics was not a metaphor when de Waal applied it to what he saw at Arnhem. It was a description, sleep well. The chimpanzees at the research sites where the long-term behavioral programs are running tonight are engaged in the continuous management of the social landscape that their competitive and reproductive lives require. The grooming that one male directs toward another is a political act in the sense that de Waal defined. The support that one male provides to another in a conflict with a third is a political act. The reconciliation behavior that follows a confrontation is a political act. And the long-term management of the coalition relationships that determine the outcome of the succession struggles that will eventually occur in each of these communities is a political process that is always running in the social interactions of every day, in the forests and the research enclosures where the science of chimpanzee politics is still being conducted. The politics does not rest. Sleep well. The measurement of political intelligence in chimpanzees, which the comparative cognitive research has approached through the design of experimental tasks that require tracking the social relationships between third parties, predicting social behavior from relationship information, and using social information strategically in competitive contexts, has produced findings that illuminate the cognitive architecture underlying the behavioral phenomena that de Waal documented at Arnhem. Chimpanzees in these experiments show the ability to track the dominance relationships between third parties they are observing, to use this tracking to make predictions about the outcomes of social conflicts they witness, and to selectively approach the dominant member of a pair for social interaction in ways that suggest they are representing the social landscape of the group rather than simply responding to individual behavioral cues. These findings support the hypothesis that the political behavior documented at Arnhem and in wild populations is underpinned by a genuine social representational system that allows the chimpanzee to model the social relationships of its community and to use that model to guide its own social behavior. The succession from Louis to Nicky at Arnhem and the eventual breakdown of the coalition that produced it ended with one of the most disturbing events in the behavioral science of great apes. The details of what happened between the three males, Jeroen, Nicky, and Louis, in the final stages of the political dynamic that de Waal had been observing for years, are details that the research record preserves, and that de Waal described in his accounts with the combination of scientific precision and personal reflection that the event's weight required. The event changed how de Waal thought about chimpanzee politics, and it changed how the behavioral science thought about the relationship between the analytical frameworks of behavioral ecology and the lived reality of the animals whose behavior those frameworks are applied to. The political behavior is real, its consequences can be fatal, and the researcher who has spent years following the social maneuvering of a chimpanzee community knows, when the politics breaks down in the most violent possible way, that the analytical distance between observer and observed has its limits. Sleep well. The Arnhem colony no longer exists in the form that de Waal documented. The animals of the original colony have died, and the zoo's chimpanzee program has changed over the decades since the research that produced the political behavior data was conducted. What remains is the research record that de Waal and his colleagues produced during the years of intensive observation. and the theoretical and empirical legacy that the record generated in comparative behavioral science. The behavioral science of chimpanzee politics began with the observation of 23 chimpanzees in an outdoor enclosure in the Netherlands, and it has expanded across 50 years to encompass the wild populations at the long-term research sites in Africa, the comparative cognitive research in laboratories around the world, and the theoretical frameworks that have connected the chimpanzee's political behavior to the evolutionary origins of human social intelligence. What started at Arnhem in 1975 is still producing research and still generating debate in the forests and the laboratories and the theoretical literature where the science of primate social behavior is conducted. Sleep well. The chimpanzee alpha male who is managing his coalition tonight, in whichever forest or research colony his life is being lived, is doing what the behavioral science has spent 50 years documenting. He is grooming the allies whose support maintains his position. He is monitoring the relationships between the males who might challenge him and the males whose support those challengers might seek. He is managing the female relationships that provide the reproductive payoff for the position he holds. And he is doing all of this within the cognitive framework of a social intelligence that the evolutionary history of his lineage has refined for the management of exactly this kind of competitive social landscape. The politics is happening right now in the grooming and the coalitions and the management of relationships that constitute the daily social life of chimpanzee communities. What de Waal saw at Arnhem was a window into this politics. The window has been open for 50 years. What it shows is more complex and more remarkable than what the first observers expected. Sleep well. The long-term research at Gombe has produced the most extensive record of chimpanzee alpha male succession available, spanning more than 60 years and multiple generations of individuals. The succession events recorded in the Gombe data show a consistent pattern in the timeline of political transitions. The period of coalition building before the challenge, which can last months to years, the confrontation period during which the challenger and the incumbent test each other's coalition strength repeatedly before one or the other achieves a decisive advantage, and the post-succession stabilization period, during which the community's social relationships reorganize around the new alpha's dominance. The timeline of each phase varies between successions in ways that reflect the relative capabilities and coalition resources of the individuals involved, but the structure of the sequence is consistent across the Gombe succession record in ways that confirm the political behavior as a stable feature of the community's social dynamics rather than an idiosyncratic response to the personalities of the individuals involved. The relationship between physical capability and political success in chimpanzee communities is not the simple dominance by force relationship that the earliest accounts of primate social behavior assumed. The Arnhem data showed that the physically weaker Yeroan could maintain dominance over the physically stronger Luit through coalition management, and the wild population data has confirmed that the alpha male is not always the largest or the most physically imposing male in the community. What predicts alpha male tenure is a combination of physical capability, coalition resources, and the social intelligence to manage both effectively. The chimpanzee who achieves and maintains the alpha position is not necessarily the strongest male. He is the most politically capable male, in the sense that his management of the social landscape of the community has produced the combination of physical intimidation and coalition support that makes his position more stable than the alternatives available to the other males in the community. The alpha female of the chimpanzee community, whose role in the community's social dynamics is less studied than the alpha males, because the female dominance hierarchy is less actively contested, has a political influence on the community's social dynamics that the research has documented in enough detail to make clear that the female social structure is not simply a background condition for the male political dynamics. High-ranking females have priority access to the best foraging areas within the community's range. Their offspring benefit from the higher quality social environment that high-ranking female status provides, and their relationships with the alpha male and with the other high-ranking males of the community shape the competitive landscape of the male dominance hierarchy in ways that the analysis of male politics in isolation misses. The female political behavior is not as dramatic as the male political behavior, but it is as real, as consequential for the individuals involved, and as connected to the evolutionary logic of social competition in a social species. The chimpanzee's political behavior, documented at Arnhem in 1975 and confirmed across 50 years of research in captive colonies and wild populations, is one of the most important findings in the behavioral science of social animals. It changed how the field thought about what non-human animal social behavior is and what it is for. It changed how the field thought about the evolutionary origins of social intelligence and the cognitive capabilities that social intelligence requires. And it changed how the field thought about the relationship between human social behavior and the social behavior of our closest living relatives, providing a behavioral model of the foundations of human political behavior that the evolutionary argument for continuity between the two is built on. The dark truth about chimpanzee politics is that it is not dark at all in the sense of being hidden or suppressed. It has been visible in the grooming and the coalitions and the succession struggles and the reconciliations of chimpanzee communities for as long as the research has been looking for it. What was dark was our assumption that politics was something we invented. Sleep well. The bonobo comparison, which this channel has addressed in the series on bonobo behavior, adds a dimension to the understanding of chimpanzee political behavior that the chimpanzee data alone cannot provide. The bonobo's social dynamics are organized around female coalitions that constrain male competitive behavior in ways that are fundamentally different from the male-dominated political dynamics of chimpanzee communities. The absence of the escalated male-male political competition that characterizes chimpanzee communities in the bonobo's social life, despite the two species' close genetic relationship and similar basic social organization, is one of the most informative comparisons in the behavioral science of great apes. It demonstrates that the chimpanzee's political behavior is not an inevitable consequence of the basic social structure that the two species share, but a behavioral solution to the competitive challenges of their social and ecological life that the two species have arrived at differently. The chimpanzee's politics is real, the bonobo's alternative is also real, and the comparison between the two illuminates both more clearly than either can be understood in isolation. The Frans de Waal, who arrived at Arnhem Zoo in 1975, was a young researcher who did not yet know what he was going to find. The Frans de Waal, who published the Arnhem data in 1982, had spent 6 years watching a social dynamic unfold that would eventually change the behavioral science of primate social life, generate research programs that have continued for 50 years, and produce a theoretical framework that has connected the behavior of chimpanzees in an outdoor enclosure in the Netherlands to the evolutionary origins of human social intelligence and political behavior. The connection between those 2 points, the young researcher arriving at a zoo colony in 1975 and the 50 years of science that his observations generated, is the connection that the dark truth of chimpanzee politics ultimately reduces to: an observer willing to look carefully at what is in front of him, and a set of animals willing to reveal, in the management of their social relationships and their competitive positioning, something that the science had not previously understood about what social intelligence is and where it came from. Sleep well. The coalition that is being managed tonight in the social interactions of chimpanzee communities in the forests of Africa and in the research colonies where behavioral science continues to study these animals is a coalition built from grooming and support and the long memory of social reciprocity that the chimpanzee's social intelligence maintains. The alpha male who grooms his most important ally before settling into his night nest is doing what Yaron did at Arnhem, what the Gombe alpha males have done for 60 years of documented social life, and what the evolutionary history of chimpanzee social competition has shaped the behavioral system of chimpanzee politics to produce. The politics is not metaphorical, it is functional. And it is happening right now in the social interactions of the most politically sophisticated non-human animals on Earth. Sleep well. The succession events that will occur in the chimpanzee communities being monitored by the long-term research programs over the next decade are events whose outcomes the behavioral science cannot predict, but whose structure it can anticipate. The challenger who builds his coalition before directly confronting the incumbent. The incumbent who manages his existing alliances to maintain his position against the challenge. The female support that will tip the balance in the confrontations that the challenge produces. And the post-succession dynamics that will reorganize the community's social relationships around the new competitive landscape that the succession has created. These are the features that the 50 years of chimpanzee political research have established as the consistent structure of the succession process, and they will play out in the next succession event at Gombe and Kibale and Thai Forest, as they have played out in the succession events that the research record has documented. The science knows what to look for. The animals will do what the politics of their social world requires. Sleep well. The Arnhem colony was not a natural chimpanzee social environment. It was a designed space, bounded and managed, where the social dynamics that the research documented were real, but were expressed in conditions that the animals had not evolved for. The wild chimpanzee communities at the long-term research sites are natural environments where the behavioral logic that Dewal identified at Arnhem is expressed in the context of the ranging behavior, the territorial competition, and the ecological pressures that shaped the political behavior in the first place. What the Arnhem data provided was a concentrated, accessible window into a behavioral system that the wild population data has confirmed and extended and complicated in ways that the captive colony setting could not have produced on its own. The science of chimpanzee politics required both the controlled clarity of the Arnhem observation and the ecological validity of the wild population research. Together, they have produced the understanding that this video has tried to convey. Sleep well. In 1924, a researcher named Glenn Finley attempted to measure the pulling strength of a chimpanzee at the Bronx Zoo. The animal he was testing, a female named Suzette, pulled 260 pounds on a scale designed for the task. A large adult male human in peak physical condition can pull approximately 300 pounds. Suzette weighed roughly 130 pounds. The story spread. By the time it reached the popular science literature of the 1930s, the number had become 260 pounds for a chimpanzee in an excited state, and the comparison to humans had become a claim that chimpanzees were 7 to 8 times stronger than humans pound for pound. That number has been repeating for 90 years. It is probably wrong, but the truth, once you understand it, is almost more interesting than the myth. Subscribe right now and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that button right now. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this channel going. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. We read every single one. The 1924 Bronx Zoo experiment had a problem that the reporting on it did not acknowledge. The chimpanzee was pulling with its whole body, using all 4 limbs and its back and its core, in a maximum effort that included jumping, jerking, and throwing its full weight against the dynamometer. The comparison to human strength was made using measurements of human hand strength, not whole body pulling strength, in a maximum panic effort. When researchers attempted to replicate the experiment under more controlled conditions that allowed valid comparison, the numbers came out very differently. The most rigorous comparative study of chimpanzee and human muscle strength, published in the behavioral and biomechanical literature, conducted by Matthew O'Neill and Brian Hanna, and published in 2017, used a combination of direct measurement of chimpanzee muscle contractions and biomechanical modeling to estimate the force that chimpanzee muscle fibers produce per unit of cross-sectional area compared to human muscle fibers. The result was that chimpanzee muscle fibers produce approximately 35 times the force per unit of cross-sectional area that human muscle fibers produce. Not 7 times, not 5 times, about a third more force per unit of muscle tissue. That is still a genuine difference. The question of why it exists and what it implies about the different evolutionary paths that the 2 lineages have taken in the domain of muscular performance is one of the most interesting questions in comparative biomechanics. The muscle fiber composition of chimpanzees differs from the muscle fiber composition of humans in ways that the research has measured directly through biopsies of chimpanzee muscle tissue collected from animals that had died of natural causes at research institutions. Human skeletal muscle contains a mixture of fiber types, with slow-twitch fibers that are metabolically efficient and fatigue-resistant, predominating in the muscles used for sustained posture and endurance activity, and fast-twitch fibers that generate more force but fatigue more quickly, predominating in the muscles used for explosive high-force activities. The chimpanzee skeletal muscle analyzed in the studies shows a higher proportion of fast-twitch fibers across the major muscle groups than the equivalent human muscle groups show. The chimpanzee is not simply stronger than the human in some absolute sense. The chimpanzee's muscle architecture is tilted toward explosive force generation at the cost of the sustained fine motor control that the higher proportion of slow-twitch fibers in human muscle provides. The implications of this difference in fiber type distribution extend beyond the simple question of how much force the chimpanzee can generate. The ratio of fiber types in a muscle affects not just the peak force the muscle can produce, but the precision with which the muscle can be controlled. Slow-twitch fibers and the motor neurons that control them are organized in smaller motor units that allow the nervous system to make finer adjustments to muscle force than the larger motor units associated with fast-twitch fibers permit. The human hand's extraordinary fine motor control, which allows the manipulation of small objects with the precision that tool use, writing, and musical performance require, is supported partly by the high proportion of slow-twitch fibers in the intrinsic hand muscles, and partly by the large representation of the hand in the motor cortex. The chimpanzee's hand, which is capable of impressive strength, but substantially less capable of fine motor precision than the human hand, reflects the different fiber type composition and the different neural organization that the chimpanzee's evolutionary history has produced. The bone and joint architecture that the chimpanzee's muscle system operates through is another dimension of the strength comparison that the simple force measurement does not capture. The mechanical advantage that a muscle achieves in producing movement around a joint is determined partly by the force the muscle generates, and partly by the length of the lever arm through which the force is applied. The chimpanzee's upper limb skeleton has proportions that produce different lever arm lengths for the major pulling muscles than the human upper limb skeleton. And these differences in lever arm geometry mean that the same muscle force produces different movement capabilities in the two species. The chimpanzee's shoulder and elbow anatomy is optimized for the pulling and climbing forces that arboreal locomotion demands, with muscle attachment points positioned to maximize the mechanical advantage of the pulling motion. The human anatomy reflects the different demands of bipedal locomotion and the throwing motion that has been proposed as a selection force shaping the human upper limb. The throwing capability of humans, which substantially exceeds the throwing capability of chimpanzees, despite the chimpanzee's greater raw muscle force, is one of the most informative comparative findings in the biomechanics of human and chimpanzee motor performance. A trained human baseball pitcher can throw a ball at speeds exceeding 150 kilometers per hour. A chimpanzee, despite its greater muscle strength, throws at velocities substantially lower than what an average adult human can achieve. The biomechanical analysis of throwing reveals why the human's anatomy, including the rotator cuff muscles, the waist rotation, and the elbow extension sequence that characterizes the human throwing motion, is a highly refined system for converting stored elastic energy in the muscles and tendons of the shoulder and arm into the translational velocity of the thrown object. The chimpanzee's anatomy does not have the same degree of refinement for the throwing motion, and the chimpanzee's throwing behavior does not show the same learned optimization of the throwing sequence that human throwers develop through practice. The comparison between chimpanzee and human jumping ability provides another window into the different ways that the two species' muscle architectures translate raw force into movement capability. Chimpanzees can produce impressive leaping movements in the arboreal environment, covering horizontal distances of several meters in the course of locomotion through the canopy. Human athletes, with their different muscle architecture and their training-optimized movement patterns, can also produce impressive jumping performances, but the comparison of the two species' jumping capability under controlled conditions reveals that the chimpanzee's higher proportion of fast-twitch fibers does not automatically translate into superior jumping performance relative to body size when the jumping is compared across species. The coordination and the sequencing of muscle activation that produces efficient jumping is as important as the raw force the muscles generate, and the neural control of this coordination differs between species in ways that influence the jumping outcome independently of the raw muscle force. The neural control of movement is where the most fundamental difference between chimpanzee and human muscular performance becomes visible. The human nervous system's extraordinary precision in the control of muscle force, timing, and coordination is the product of the expanded motor cortex, the corticospinal tract that connects the motor cortex directly to motor neurons in the spinal cord, and the cerebellar circuits that regulate the timing and the sequencing of complex movement sequences. The chimpanzee's motor control system is capable and impressive by non-human primate standards, but it does not match the human system in the precision of force control, the complexity of the movement sequences it can coordinate, or the degree to which learned motor patterns can be optimized through practice. The chimpanzee that uses a stone to crack a nut is demonstrating impressive motor control. The human surgeon performing microsurgery is demonstrating something that the chimpanzee's motor control system cannot replicate. The evolutionary trade-off that this comparison reveals is a trade-off between force and control. The human lineage, across the 6 million years since the common ancestor with chimpanzees, has shifted the balance of its muscle architecture and its neural motor control system from force toward precision, at a cost in raw strength and an immense gain in the range and the complexity of the motor behaviors that the system can support. The chimpanzee's evolutionary history has maintained a different balance, retaining more of the fast twitch fiber composition and the force-generating capacity that arboreal locomotion and the demands of social competition have favored at the cost of the fine motor precision that the human lineage has developed. The social context of chimpanzee strength, which is the context in which the strength is most functionally relevant, is the context of male competitive behavior. The displays and the coalitional confrontations that the chimpanzee politics described in this channel's previous video involves are contexts in which the ability to produce impressive displays of force, to project physical capability through the acoustic and visual signals of the display, and to deliver and receive the physical force of a contact confrontation are all relevant. The male chimpanzee's strength is not primarily a tool use capability or a prey capture capability. It is a competitive signaling and combat capability shaped by the social selection pressure of male-male competition across the evolutionary history of the species. The male chimpanzee's impressive musculature is the product of the same evolutionary dynamic that produces extreme male physical development in other polygynous species. The males who were stronger and who could better project and deliver force in competitive contexts were the males who achieved higher dominance rank and greater reproductive success, and the strength advantage was therefore maintained and elaborated across generations of selection. The practical question of what would happen if a human and a chimpanzee came into direct physical conflict, which underlies the popular interest in the strength comparison and which the inflated estimates of chimpanzee strength have fed for 90 years, is answered by the documented cases more clearly than the strength measurements alone. The cases of chimpanzee attacks on humans, which have been documented in the research literature and in the records of chimpanzee sanctuaries and research facilities, show that adult chimpanzees can inflict devastating injuries on adult humans in the course of attacks. The attacks do not show the one-sided domination that the 7 times stronger myth would predict, because the human's greater height, reach, and the ability to deploy defensive tools change the dynamics of the encounter. But the documented attacks do show that the chimpanzee's combination of strength, speed, and bite force is capable of producing injuries that adult humans cannot easily resist when the encounter is uncontrolled and when the chimpanzee has committed to an attack. The realism is not the myth's 7 times, it is the 35 times combined with the different muscle architecture, the faster reaction time, the bite force, and the behavioral, uninhibited commitment to the attack that produces the documented outcomes. The research on chimpanzee grip strength, which has been measured directly in studies using instrumented grip devices adapted for chimpanzee use, shows that chimpanzees produce grip forces that are substantially higher than the grip forces measured in humans, even after controlling for body mass. The grip strength advantage is larger than the overall muscle force advantage measured in the O'Neill and Hanna study, and the explanation for the discrepancy is found in the anatomy of the chimpanzee hand. The chimpanzee's hand has longer fingers relative to the palm, a deeper and more flexed grip posture, and muscle attachment points that produce a greater mechanical advantage for the gripping motion than the human hand's anatomy provides. The grip strength advantage is therefore partly a product of the muscle force difference and partly a product of the anatomical leverage difference, and both components contribute to the capability that makes the chimpanzee's grip so much more powerful than the human grip despite the more modest overall muscle force difference. The climbing capability of the chimpanzee, which is one of the functional expressions of its strength advantage that is most directly observable in behavioral contexts, reflects the combination of the muscle force advantage, the grip strength advantage, and the different limb proportions that make the chimpanzee's body plan more suited to vertical climbing than the human body plan. A chimpanzee can ascend a vertical pole or tree trunk at a speed that an elite human climber would find difficult to match, using the combination of upper and lower limb strength and the grip strength that the chimpanzee's hand provides. The human climber who matches the chimpanzee's climbing speed does so through trained technique that compensates for the anatomical and physiological disadvantage that the comparison reveals. The truth about chimpanzee strength, 50 years after the research has replaced the 1924 Bronx Zoo story with more rigorous data, is that the chimpanzee is genuinely stronger than the human by a significant but not mythological margin, that the strength advantage is accompanied by a different muscle architecture that trades fine motor control for explosive force generation, and that the evolutionary history of the human lineage represents a deliberate trade in the currency of natural selection, of some of the raw force capability that the common ancestor possessed in exchange for the motor precision that has made the human hand the most capable manipulative organ in the animal kingdom. The chimpanzee kept more of the force, the human traded it for control. What the human got in exchange is the fine motor precision that underlies every technology, every written word, every surgical procedure, and every musical performance that the human lineage has produced. Whether the trade was worth it depends on what you think the lineage has done with what it received. Sleep well. The cortical representation of the hand in the human motor and somatosensory cortex is disproportionately large relative to the hand's physical size, a feature of human brain organization that reflects the evolutionary investment in the neural hardware for fine motor control that the human lineage has made. The chimpanzee's cortical representation of the hand is substantial compared to other primates, reflecting the chimpanzee's genuine manual dexterity, but it does not match the humans in the density of the cortical representation or in the direct corticospinal connections that allow the human motor cortex to control individual finger movements with the independence that fine motor tasks require. The neural organization that underlies the chimpanzee's impressive strength and the human's impressive fine motor control represents two different ways of organizing the same basic primate motor system, each reflecting the evolutionary priorities of the lineage that has developed it. The chimpanzee's performance on motor tasks in comparative cognitive research illuminates the relationship between strength, control, and behavioral outcome in ways that the strength measurement data alone cannot. Chimpanzees in laboratory settings can manipulate objects, solve mechanical puzzles, and use simple tools with a dexterity that exceeds the capabilities of most non-human primates, and that is impressive in absolute terms. The comparison of chimpanzee tool use with human tool use reveals the boundary of the chimpanzee's motor capability. The chimpanzee can use a stone to crack a nut with impressive force and reasonable accuracy, but the precision of force modulation that would allow the chimpanzee to crack the nut without damaging the kernel is a precision that the chimpanzee's motor control system achieves less reliably than the humans. The task that requires raw force falls within the chimpanzee's capability. The task that requires fine modulation of force around a target value reveals the difference in motor control precision that the different muscle architectures and neural organizations produce. The documented cases of chimpanzees performing tasks that require the sustained application of controlled force, such as the nut-cracking behavior documented at Bossou and other West African sites, provide behavioral evidence for the chimpanzee's motor control capability in naturalistic contexts. The chimpanzee that selects the appropriate stone for nut cracking, positions the nut on the anvil stone, and delivers a strike of appropriate force to crack the shell without pulverizing the kernel, is demonstrating a level of force modulation and motor planning that the simple strength measurement does not capture. The motor learning that underlies this performance, which takes young chimpanzees years to develop to adult proficiency, is an expression of the chimpanzee's genuine motor intelligence operating within the constraints and the capabilities of its motor control system. The comparison between the chimpanzee's strength advantage and the human's motor control advantage becomes most revealing in the context of the tasks that each species performs most efficiently. The chimpanzee ascending a tree at full speed, using its grip strength, upper limb force, and lower limb power, is performing a task for which its morphology and physiology are optimized, and the performance is impressive by any comparative standard. The human surgeon performing a microsurgical procedure under a microscope, using the force modulation and the fine motor precision that the human motor control system provides, is performing a task for which the human morphology and physiology are optimized, and the performance is impressive by any comparative standard. The two performances are expressions of different solutions to the problem of what to do with a primate motor system, optimized through different evolutionary histories for different ecological and social demands. The tendon architecture that stores and releases elastic energy during locomotion and during explosive force production is another dimension of the comparative biomechanics of chimpanzee and human strength that the research has begun to characterize. The Achilles tendon in humans, which stores elastic energy during the loading phase of each step and releases it during the propulsive phase, is one of the most energy-efficient structures in the locomotor system and contributes significantly to the energetic efficiency of human walking and running. The chimpanzee's lower limb tendon architecture is different in ways that reflect the different locomotor demands of the chimpanzee's quadrupedal and arboreal movement patterns, and the elastic energy storage capabilities of the chimpanzee's tendons are organized for the demands of climbing and brachiation rather than for the demands of sustained bipedal locomotion. The tendon architecture differences contribute to the different performance profiles of the two species across different types of physical tasks, and illuminate the degree to which the body plan of each species is a coherent system shaped by the demands of its evolutionary history, rather than a collection of independently varying traits. The popular fascination with chimpanzee strength, which has sustained the myth of the 7 times stronger chimpanzee for 90 years, despite the availability of more accurate information, reflects something real about the psychological impact of encountering the physical reality of a large adult chimpanzee at close range. The researchers and the veterinarians who have worked with adult chimpanzees in captive settings describe the experience of handling or restraining an adult chimpanzee during veterinary procedures with a consistent emphasis on the difficulty of controlling the animal, even when the chimpanzee is not at full exertion and not committed to resisting the restraint. The combination of the strength, the coordination, and the behavioral unpredictability of an adult chimpanzee in a context where it feels threatened produces a handling challenge that experienced professionals describe as qualitatively different from the challenge of handling other large mammals of comparable body size. The myth exaggerates the numbers. The reality that the myth is trying to capture is genuine. The evolution of the common ancestor of chimpanzees and humans is a subject that the comparative anatomical and biomechanical data from both living species can be used to address within the limits of what can be inferred from comparative data about an animal that left no direct physical record of its soft tissue anatomy. The inferences that the researchers drawing on the comparative biomechanics data make about the common ancestor suggest that it was probably more chimpanzee-like than human-like in its muscle fiber composition and its overall strength-to-mass ratio, because the human lineage has undergone more derived changes in muscle architecture and neural motor control than the chimpanzee lineage has since the divergence of the two lineages approximately 6 million years ago. The common ancestor of the two lineages was probably a strong, capable arboreal and terrestrial animal whose muscle architecture was biased toward the fast-twitch end of the fiber-type spectrum and whose motor control system had not yet undergone the elaboration of fine motor precision that the human lineage subsequently developed. The fossil evidence for the evolution of human hand anatomy and motor control, which the paleoanthropological research has assembled from the skeletal remains of the human lineage across the last 6 million years, shows a progressive trend toward the modern human hand's precision grip capability across the evolutionary history of the genus Homo. The earlier members of the human lineage show hand proportions that are intermediate between the modern humans and the chimpanzees, with longer fingers and different muscle attachment point geometry that suggest a different balance between grip strength and fine motor precision than the modern human hand exhibits. The evolution of the modern human hand, with its shorter fingers, more developed thumb, and the muscle and tendon architecture that supports the precision grip, is now understood as a gradual process that extended across several million years, and that was associated with the progressive elaboration of stone tool technology that is documented in the archaeological record. The energetic cost of the chimpanzee's muscle architecture is one dimension of the strength comparison that the force measurements do not capture, but that is relevant to understanding the evolutionary trade-offs involved. Fast-twitch muscle fibers are energetically expensive to maintain and to use, requiring more metabolic resources per unit of force generation than slow-twitch fibers in sustained activity. The chimpanzee's higher proportion of fast-twitch fibers therefore makes its musculature more metabolically demanding than the humans for the same body mass, and the energetic cost of maintaining the chimpanzee's muscle mass is higher than the energetic cost of maintaining an equivalent mass of human muscle. The humans' shift towards slow-twitch fibers and the overall reduction in muscle mass relative to body size that the human lineage has undergone compared to the chimpanzee is partly an energetic optimization. The human burns fewer calories to maintain its muscle mass and produces less force per kilogram of body weight, but the calories saved can be allocated to the metabolically expensive human brain, which accounts for approximately 20% of the human body's total metabolic budget. The hand-bone proportions of the chimpanzee and the human, which the comparative anatomical studies have measured in detail, illuminate the different ways that the same basic primate hand structure has been shaped by different evolutionary demands. The chimpanzee's longer fingers and more curved finger bones reflect the demands of arboreal locomotion, where the grip on branches and vines requires the kind of deep, wrapped grip that longer and more curved fingers are better suited to than the shorter and straighter fingers of the human hand. The human's shorter fingers and straighter finger bones reflect the demands of the precision grip, where the opposition of the thumb to the fingertips in a delicate pinch grasp requires the geometry that shorter and straighter fingers provide more effectively than the chimpanzee's finger proportions. The hands of the two species are recognizably derived from the same ancestral primate hand, modified in different directions by the different demands of the ecological and behavioral niches that each lineage has occupied. The data that has replaced the 90-year-old myth of the 7 times stronger chimpanzee is data that most people have not encountered, because the myth has continued to circulate in the popular science literature, while the corrective research has remained in the technical publications that the popular accounts do not draw on. The 2017 O'Neill and Hanna study that produced the 135 times figure was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and received significant coverage in the science press at the time of its publication, but the popular accounts of chimpanzee strength that predate the corrective research continue to circulate alongside the corrective data rather than being replaced by it. The myth is more compelling than the truth in this case because the myth is more dramatic, and the dramatic version of the story has had 90 years to establish itself in the cultural record of what chimpanzees are. The research on chimpanzee locomotor performance, which has examined the mechanics of chimpanzee walking, running, climbing, and brachiation using the motion capture and force plate technologies that have also been applied to human locomotion, illuminates the full context of the strength comparison by placing the force generation capability in the context of the movement systems it supports. The chimpanzee's quadrupedal walking gait is mechanically inefficient compared to human bipedal walking, requiring more metabolic energy per unit of distance traveled, partly because the chimpanzee's shorter lower limbs and different pelvic orientation produce a walking gait that cannot exploit the pendulum mechanics that make human bipedal walking energetically efficient. The same body plan that makes the chimpanzee stronger than a human for upper body pulling tasks makes it a less efficient walker than a human over flat terrain. The evolutionary specialization of the chimpanzee's body plan for arboreal and social demands has costs in the terrestrial locomotor domain that the human body plan does not bear to the same degree. The bite force of the chimpanzee, which is relevant to the strength comparison in the context of the documented attack cases, where the bite is the primary weapon, substantially exceeds the human bite force and reflects the different jaw and muscle anatomy that the chimpanzee has developed relative to the human. The chimpanzee's larger temporalis and masseter muscles, which are the primary jaw-closing muscles, and the different geometry of the chimpanzee's skull that gives these muscles a more favorable mechanical advantage for generating bite force, produce bite forces that the research on primate bite mechanics has estimated at approximately 2 to 3 times the bite force of adult humans. The combination of the grip strength advantage and the bite force advantage means that in a close quarters physical confrontation, the chimpanzee's most effective offensive weapons, the grip and the bite, substantially exceed the equivalent human capabilities in ways that the overall muscle force comparison of 1.35 times does not capture. The socio-sexual context of chimpanzee strength, which connects the physical capability to the reproductive biology of the species, illuminates why the strength advantage has been maintained by natural selection in the chimpanzee lineage, while the human lineage has shifted toward fine motor control. In the chimpanzee's competitive social environment, where male dominance rank influences reproductive success, and where dominance is maintained partly through the physical intimidation of displays and the physical capability to deliver and resist force in confrontations, the strength advantage is a direct fitness advantage. The male chimpanzee who can produce a more impressive display and who can deliver more force in a confrontation achieves and maintains a higher dominance rank, which translates into greater reproductive success over the course of his competitive career. The selection pressure for the strength advantage is therefore ongoing and direct, in the same way that the selection pressure for fine motor control in the human lineage was direct in the context of tool use and the behavioral flexibility that fine motor control enables. The question of what the strength difference between chimpanzees and humans reveals about the evolutionary history of the two lineages is a question that connects to the broader question of what the human lineage gave up and what it gained in the 6 million years since the divergence from the common ancestor. The human lineage gained fine motor control, the bipedal locomotion that freed the hands for manipulation, the expanded brain that coordinates the complex motor behaviors that fine motor control enables, and the tool technology and the language and the cultural accumulation that these cognitive capabilities made possible. What the human lineage gave up, or rather, what it traded away in the currency of natural selection, includes some of the raw force capability that the common ancestor possessed and that the chimpanzee lineage has retained. Whether the trade was worth it is not a question that natural selection answers. Natural selection produces the organisms that are best suited to their environments, not the organisms that are best by any absolute standard. Both the chimpanzee and the human are products of natural selection, operating on the same ancestral lineage in different environmental and social contexts, and both have produced organisms that are remarkably well suited to the demands of the ecological and social worlds they inhabit. The chimpanzees at the research facilities and sanctuaries where the biomechanical research has been conducted are animals whose strength the researchers who work with them have encountered in practical contexts, as well as measured in experimental ones. The veterinary teams that anesthetize adult chimpanzees for health examinations, the sanctuary staff who manage the daily care of chimpanzees who are larger and stronger than the humans caring for them, and the researchers who have been involved in the documented attacks that the safety literature on working with chimpanzees describes all have a practical relationship with chimpanzee strength that the measurement data represents in numerical form. The consistency between the numerical data and the practical experience of the people who work with these animals is one of the forms of validation that the 135 times figure has, despite its distance from the 90-year-old myth that it replaces. The Suzette experiment at the Bronx Zoo in 1924 was conducted without the methodological controls that would be required to draw valid conclusions from the measurement, and the number it produced has been repeated in the popular science literature for 90 years without the appropriate caveats about the conditions under which it was measured. The corrective research that the O'Neill and Hanna study and its predecessors have produced represents the science doing what science is supposed to do, replacing a compelling but inaccurate account with a less dramatic but more accurate one. The result, 1. 35 times is not as striking as 7 times, but it is more interesting in the ways that matter for understanding what the strength difference between chimpanzees and humans actually is and why it exists. The truth about chimpanzee strength is not that chimpanzees are almost unimaginably stronger than humans. It is that they are genuinely stronger in ways that reflect a different evolutionary trade-off, a different allocation of the resources available to a primate body and a primate nervous system, toward the explosive force that arboreal locomotion and social competition demand, rather than toward the fine motor control that tool use and manipulation demand. Both allocations produced animals that are extraordinary in their domains. The comparison between them is one of the most illuminating comparisons in the comparative biology of closely related species. Sleep well. The human who stands next to an adult male chimpanzee and registers the difference in physical presence is not wrong to register it. The chimpanzee is substantially more muscular relative to its size than the human. Its limb proportions are different in ways that translate the muscle force into different mechanical capabilities, and the behavioral, uninhibited commitment to force that the chimpanzee's social and ecological history has shaped is different from the behavioral restraint that human social and legal contexts impose on physical force in most situations. What the human who registers this difference should understand is that the difference is not 7 times, it is 1. 35 times in raw muscle force, amplified by different lever arm geometry, higher grip strength, greater bite force, and the faster muscle contraction speed that the higher proportion of fast twitch fibers provides. That combination is genuinely impressive and genuinely dangerous in a confrontational context. It is also the product of a different evolutionary history, not evidence of a fundamentally different kind of physical system, but evidence of a different allocation of the same basic primate physical system toward different functional demands. Sleep well. The comparative anatomy of the shoulder in chimpanzees and humans is one of the anatomical comparisons that most directly illuminates the difference in the functional demands that the two species' upper limbs are adapted for. The chimpanzee's shoulder has a more superior orientation of the glenoid fossa, the socket in which the head of the humerus articulates, which positions the shoulder joint for efficient overhead pulling and climbing. The human shoulder has a more lateral glenoid orientation that positions the joint for efficient throwing and manipulation in a forward plane. The difference in glenoid orientation is accompanied by differences in the muscles that surround and move the shoulder joint, with the chimpanzee having more developed muscles for overhead pulling and the human having more developed muscles for the rotational movement of the throwing motion. The shoulder anatomy of the two species is a direct expression in bone and muscle of the different functional demands that the evolutionary histories of the two lineages have placed on the upper limb. The public record of chimpanzee attacks on humans, which the Chimpanzee Sanctuary and Research Facility communities have compiled in the interest of improving safety protocols, shows a consistent pattern that the theoretical comparisons between chimpanzee and human strength do not fully prepare the reader for. The attacks in the record involve adult chimpanzees who have been in captivity for extended periods, who are familiar with humans and who have no history of unprovoked aggression, attacking adult humans with a speed and a force commitment that the humans involved describe as qualitatively different from what they had understood to be the physical relationship between the two species. The strength of the attack is real and severe. The speed of the transition from apparent calm to full attack commitment is something that the humans who have experienced it describe with consistent emphasis. And the bite wounds that are the most clinically significant injuries from the documented attacks reflect the bite force advantage that the comparative anatomy predicts. The myth of the 7 times stronger chimpanzee is wrong. The reality it was trying to capture is not. The night finds the chimpanzees in their nests, the upper limbs that carry their strength advantage, folded in the sleeping posture that the arboreal ancestry of the species shaped. The strength that this video has been examining is not in use right now. It is stored in the muscle fibers that will power tomorrow's climbing and display and social competition, waiting for the demands that the chimpanzee's ecological and social world will place on it. The human who sleeps in a bed tonight carries in their hands and their motor cortex the fine motor capability that the 6 million years of the human lineage has purchased at the cost of some of the force that the common ancestor possessed. Both capabilities, the chimpanzee's force and the human's precision, are remarkable products of the evolutionary process operating on the same basic primate body plan over the same basic time frame. The comparison between them is a comparison between 2 solutions to the problem of what to do with a primate body. Each solution optimized for a different set of demands, each producing an animal that is extraordinary in the domain for which it was shaped. Sleep well. The 135 times figure that the 2017 research produced will not replace the 90-year-old myth as quickly as the accuracy of the corrective research deserves, because myths about animal strength are more compelling than the technical literature that corrects them, and because the popular science channels and the social media accounts that amplify the dramatic version of the story have more reach than the peer-reviewed publications that produce the accurate version. What this video can offer is the accurate account, placed in the evolutionary and biomechanical context that makes it more interesting than the myth, not because the reality is less impressive than the myth, but because the reality reveals something that the myth obscures, the genuine nature of the evolutionary trade-off that separates the human lineage from the chimpanzee lineage in the domain of physical capability, and the genuine impressiveness of both solutions that the trade-off produced. The chimpanzees in the wild populations and the research facilities that have contributed the data for this video's account of chimpanzee strength are animals whose physical capabilities the researchers who study them have encountered in the field and in the laboratory in ways that the numbers in the research literature represent. The chimpanzee that climbs a vertical surface at a speed that no unequipped human can match. The chimpanzee whose grip on a branch does not release under forces that would peel a human hand away. And the chimpanzee whose display involves the demolition of vegetation at a pace and with a force that communicates physical capability more effectively than any number can, are all expressions of a physical system that the evolutionary history of the chimpanzee lineage has shaped for the demands of the chimpanzee's world. The numbers in the research literature describe this system accurately, within the limits of what measurement can capture. The experience of being in the presence of a large adult chimpanzee adds dimensions to the accurate description that the numbers alone do not convey. Sleep well.